Happy 2026. Happy New Year to everyone. We're going to kick off this season. It's episode 213, going into our eighth and a half year of podcasting. And I thought we would ease into this season with a topic that we've had a lot of very positive feedback on, which is personal health and wellness. If you've been following the podcast, you know over the past few months, we've been interviewing national experts about health and wellness, and we've learned a lot. It's a timely thing. I think if you're like me, you are getting back to the gym. You're starting to try to shed those holiday pounds. You're thinking about what you're going to look like in your bathing suit during spring vacation or summer vacation. And so I thought I would bring Jess on, and she and I actually, to be just really transparent about it, talk about this a lot in between our episodes. I think probably a minute or two into this conversation, you're going to want to join in too, and I'm sure you're going to have your own opinions. So Jess, do you want to introduce yourself a little bit, and why don't we kick off the conversation?
Absolutely, yes. So thanks again for having me, Zev, and Happy New Year to you as well. I'm Jess Greenwood. I work with Zev closely, producing the podcast, Creating a New Healthcare. So I get an opportunity to listen to all of the guests, which sometimes is a good thing for Zev and sometimes a bad thing, because it means that I come to him with lots of questions about what he thinks from his experience as a physician executive and an internal medicine specialist. And so I think this wearable thing, health and wellness, but specifically the wearable device piece, after talking to a couple of the wearable device makers back in the fall, it just really got us on a kick of, what does this have to do with individual personal wellness and health? And like, how does any specific wearable or any of them at all actually influence that? So, to kind of kick us off, I would love to know, Zep, if you actually have a wearable device, and if you do, how do you use it in your own life?
So I have used Fitbit a while ago, not the latest version of it. So I've had some experience early on with that. And I have downloaded a bunch of apps, some of whom we've interviewed, see these folks. And so I've been using some of the wellness apps over the past few months. And I will tell you that I'm about to, as a holiday gift, I've received a wearable device. We could talk about which one. But I have to tell you, Jess, I have mixed feelings about these wearable devices, based on my own experience, but also based on some of the feedback I've gotten from folks. And the question I have, it's almost a little bit about buyer beware.
Yeah.
Like, it feels like it's the right thing to do. And it's kind of the cool thing to do. All the cool kids are wearing their Auras and their Whoops and this and their Fitbits, and they're always, looking, and they know their heart rate variability and their readiness score, and, they're talking about the steps. And so it is a little bit of the cool kid phenomena, but in terms of the real value, in terms of, what we're gonna, is this gonna really help me stay healthy? Is this gonna help me live a longer, healthier life, the so-called health span? Will it do what Tom Frieden? So Tom Frieden in his book, and I've read Eric Topol's book as well. If folks aren't familiar, Dr. Topol is probably one of the foremost authorities on this topic, a real scientist and a physician scientist. And, they point out some very, very simple things, right? I mean, it's basically, eat nutritious food, which, also known as stay away from processed food. So if you just stay away from processed food, eat what comes out of the ground, right? Eat what's grown. Number one. Number two, stay away from alcohol, drugs, and cigarettes, right? Number three, get physical activity, which, by the way, Tom Frieden, who's just brilliant, puts it this way. He calls physical activity the wonder drug. He actually thinks it's more powerful than some of than the GLP-1 medications. So physical activity, and then finally, two simple things: get your blood pressure checked, and your cholesterol checked. And, and with, really simple, primary care preventive stuff. Again, obviously things like, cancer screening, things like that. But, so get a primary care doctor, eat nutritiously, stay away from processed foods, get physical activity, and minimize your alcohol, no drugs, and no cigarettes. And so the question I have, if that's the formula, right? And again, it takes, how do I get physical activity? How do I, what kind of nutritious diet? So there's more detail to it. But if that's really the formula, then I'm just going to put it this way to you. Why in God's name do I need to spend hundreds of dollars on another device that I put on my hand or my wrist? Do I really need those things? And I know you've got some questions about that. We've had some debates. I'm sure now people who are listening, I wish you could join the conversation. But Jess, go, what do you think? I've said a lot already.
Yeah, I'm a skeptic by nature. So, I do not have a wearable device. I have, however, worn several of them as an experiment to see what information I actually get from them. And I think like maybe this harkens back to my days of being a genetic counselor when we made women who turned 35 advanced maternal age, like something magical happens between the day that they were
Mm,
34 and 11 months and the day they turned 35. It's kind of the same thing to me. Like, is there really a difference between knowing you got 10,230 steps or knowing you got 9,875 steps? Like, that arbitrary nature seems to me to
mm,
be one of the biggest challenges. Like, if you
mm.
didn't walk as much today, do you need a watch to tell you that? I don't think so.
Right.
And I think the thing that bugs me about it is this gamification piece of it, where it's
Yeah.
like you're going to get a badge if you hit 10,000 steps, but God forbid you walked 9,800 and you don't get your badge for the day. It's like it feels like
Interesting.
we're pulling away from, to your point, we're pulling away from the core behaviors that we're trying to generate and
Right.
instead making people feel like that they have to hit an arbitrary metric that's going to ultimately be the difference between health or not health.
Well, this is one of the few times, Jess, when we're actually in agreement. So this is, I want to savor the moment here that you and I actually agree on something. But it is you're starting to get me riled up here because I went down the path over the past few months. A bunch of things happened in my life. I started to, I downloaded some apps. I was following my heart rate variability every morning. It would tell me, what my readiness score was for the day. And then I started to go down the supplement route. I'm going online. God, if I had taken the money, the amount of money I've spent on supplements and invested it, I mean, I probably would be sitting on that island right now enjoying the sun. I mean, if I took the camera right now and showed you my freezer, I got a freezer full of supplements. I've got a lifetime. By the way, folks, if you want supplements, you want vitamin D, vitamin E, you want creatinine, whatever you want, I've got in my freezer. Okay. So
Zeb's got a buy one, get one offer going
I,
on.
I don't know what's going on here. And what I found was, I went down that path. I literally I would say in November and December, I was probably swallowing 20 to 30, at least 20 to 30
Wow.
pills a day. Um, Between the different, vitamins. I had magnesium that was for the morning, and then I had a magnesium supplement for the evening. I literally had two different types of magnesiums based on so-called experts who were telling me this magnesium type is good for keeping you awake. This magnesium formulation is good for putting you to sleep. I had my multivites. Again, it just, my creatinine pills. I mean, it just got insane. And I just literally by mid-December, I was like, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. If I have to take 30 pills a day to stay healthy, and so I went tilt. And to be honest with you, and I think this happens to so many people, I went the opposite direction. I got so sick of the whole thing. I threw my apps out. I called. And by the way, let me just say something. Once you get an app, trying to get yourself off of the app. Oh my God. I had to write my congressman. I mean, it was like, seriously. I mean, I had to call them up multiple times and I was like, I don't want you anymore. Can you get me off? I don't want to pay the $20 a month. I'm not using you anymore. And the supplement's the same thing. You press the wrong button on the supplement thing, and you've got every month, you've got these supplements coming. I mean, I had to threaten to sue these companies to get them to stop sending me supplements. But I went the opposite direction. I don't know about folks out there, but in December, I started, I was so sick of the whole thing. I started, I went off my diet. I started eating processed foods. I started going back to carbs and so I don't know. I don't know. I'm really, really leery now of, I think it could be a lot simpler. And in fact, when you talk to the experts like Eric, like Tom, others, and there are quite a few now that I really trust. These are physician scientists who've been spending years studying this. And they really boil it down to very, very the simple things that Tom Frieden said. I don't know that we need all these things. Again, just the value of, and I'm sure people would argue with this, and I would welcome it. Online on LinkedIn, let's have the conversation. What's the value of having all this information and data at your fingertips every day? What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's what I struggled with listening to our interviews in the fall. Like we listened to Chris Gardner, who basically said, eat plants. I mean, it was like if you eat a wide variety of plants, you shouldn't need these supplements. I mean,
Mhm.
and if you think about it, like supplementation is really very much my generation and younger's problem. I mean, we
Mhm.
didn't have supplements
Yeah.
in the 1930s, right? This is like a
Mhm.
creation that we have
Mhm.
come up with. And part of that is because we all sit a lot now. We're all inside all the time now. We're not outside doing our work. Part of it is because of processed foods and what we've leached from the actual foods that we eat, as opposed to
Mhm.
eating real foods. Part of it's what we've put into foods that we're trying to counteract because we have so many
Mhm.
toxic substances. But the core principles are really, at least we keep hearing over and over again. I'm not an expert, but we
Mhm.
keep hearing from the experts over and over again that at least from a food perspective, it's really this kind of very simple, eat less, mostly plants, not too much, right? Like it's
Mhm.
just kind of basic.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
I was reading this book by Marion Nestle. It's What to Eat Now. She wrote a famous book called What to Eat, I think a decade or more ago. She has a book out called What to Eat Now, and I was listening to it on Audible, and it's
Mhm.
long and very detailed and very well researched. And after listening to probably half of it, I kept all I could think was, so what I've taken from this is drink regular water. The rest of it is just to make you pay more. Eat food you can grow yourself. The rest of it is just to make you pay more. And I feel like this
Yeah.
theme comes again and again, which is like, for some reason, we felt the need to make some very basic tenets very complicated and
Mhm.
attach a cost to them. And I think that's what worries me is that people feel like they can't be
Mhm.
healthy if they're not wearing their watch, right? Or they're
Mhm.
not tracking their heart rate during a workout.
Mhm.
I feel like we're divorcing people's natural intuitive nature from their body. If
Mhm.
you need to wear a heart rate monitor to know that your heart rate is elevated, that's a
Mhm.
problem. So I guess I'm just,
Mhm.
I don't, whatever. If you want to wear an Oura ring because it looks cool and it's in rose gold now, cool, that's fine with me. But my
Yeah.
concern is what is that ultimately
Yeah.
doing to the way we can control our own behavior?
Well, I think so. I'm going to rail on this 1 minute, then I do want to kind of take the opposite point of view.
Yeah.
When I was using, these apps, and I would wake up in the morning and it would give me a low readiness score based on my heart rate variability and some other factors, whatever. Um, if it told me how I feel, so great readiness score, and I feel well, I was like, okay, duh, I feel well. I don't really need you to tell me that. But what I found was it when I felt well and it told me my ready score was low, it kind of brought me down. I was like, I started to
Yeah.
second guess. Maybe I don't feel as well as I feel, and I was just like, this is not a good thing.
Yeah.
And and when I wasn't feeling well and it told me my readiness was high, I was like, well, clearly this is wrong. So after a while, after about a month or so, I was like, I don't really need this. It doesn't really. I mean, I know I feel crappy. I know I went to bed late. I know I had. two glasses of wine last night, and that's two glasses too many for me. I know I ate, those M&Ms last night, and now I feel it this morning. Or, I had a pizza, and and I'm not eating. I know these things, and
Yeah.
so the device didn't really help me. Sleep, that's the one area where I've heard from folks that it does help to get your sleep scores. That people, I asked the people the same question over again. So what did you do differently as a
Mhm.
result of having this information?
Yeah.
And some folks will say sleep actually makes a difference. I start to adjust things, and it shows me, did that adjustment, I changed my sleep hours. I took the dog out of the room, so that made a difference. The lighting in the room, noise. I did get a sleep device to help me. So sleep may be the one exception. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I kind of agree with that. I don't know if it's the exception, but I can see how, and maybe I think more so across all the whole board, if you're using this because you're looking for clues on when you need to make a change in your behavior, that makes a lot of sense to me, right? Um, I don't think that's how most people use them. And so I
Mm,
guess I would say to me, there's like a combination here of what's your intent and then what's
mhm,
your follow through. And so if your intent is I want to monitor this data stream in order to know
right,
when or if I need to make changes, and then I do make the
right,
change when something feels off, then I can see that. I mean, that makes a
right,
lot of sense to me. But if you're sort of just wearing it because you think you're magically going to be healthier by wearing it, right? By rote, then I think, we've basically just given you an out as opposed to just saying, well,
right,
you need to prioritize sleep. It's like
right.
I think that's the problem. And I think the other thing that we heard from our guest in the fall, and that really got to me was
Mm,
like, what's the data actually being used for?
yeah.
And I mean, when we talked to Marco, he was talking about the example with a professional football player where they could predict injury 6 months in advance by monitoring his HRV. And I'm thinking to myself, God, that's amazing. And then I was like,
Hmm.
wait a minute. I've worked with a pro football team. They have an entire staff that does nothing but monitor these guys' metrics. So like
Right.
if you need a whole staff of people to monitor your metrics in order to have it actually
Hmm.
be useful to you, either in
Hmm.
prediction or in prevention,
Hmm.
that's not a wearable. That's an entire program, right?
It's a program. I think here's the bottom line. I think the data is actually helping the wellness industry and the device industry more than it's helping you. I
Yeah.
think what they get out of it, I mean, quite honestly, I think they should be paying us for the data we're giving them collectively, because their machine learning, their artificial intelligence, their algorithms are getting smarter and smarter and better, which by the way is fantastic. And maybe, as Marco said, maybe in a few years, it'll actually have real value for a consumer. At this point, not really clear that it does.
As someone who used to be a clinical research manager, it's really interesting to me because we absolutely used to pay people for that kind of data.
Oh,
And
really?
so it's fascinating to me to see how now you just hit agree on that initial consent form that you don't read. And basically what you're saying is it's okay for you to use my data for research, and not pay me for it, and in fact have me pay you for it. And it's
Mm,
fascinating that that model has changed because it used to be if we were doing anything in health or the wellness space, we were enrolling people in clinical research studies and they were getting $22 a visit and $100 for an EKG. And, we had an
mm,
entire
mm.
listing, accounting of what they were paid for each piece of the clinical
Interesting.
research protocol. And so it's interesting to me now that like you're not even really um consenting to that full breadth. You're just saying like, yeah, it's okay for me to use my de-identified data. And all of it's not just like what the wearable itself detects, it's also the data
Mhm.
you put in. So if you say,
Yes.
if you
Right.
put in like everything you're eating in the day, then
Hmm.
that's free research for the company because now they have the
Yeah.
combination of what you've eaten with your sleep score and anything the wearable generates. And so I agree with you.
Mm,
I don't know. I think there's right now, I guess what I would like to see is what will
mm,
come out of this massive amount of data that is being amassed for the individual.
mm,
Because if it really doesn't, then you are essentially powering something that is not ultimately going to benefit you.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, just to, again, a different point of view. And actually, this is Marco said this, and I spent a lot of years working in behavior change and with populations, trying to help large groups of people change their behavior into more healthful behaviors. And so I've been studying this and tracking this, working with experts um, uh, for years. And, I do think the one thing about wearables that may have a benefit that has very little to do with the actual data and the feedback is just the notion of habit formation.
Hmm.
And so, right. And so there actually, there's a bunch of different schools of thought about this. One is like the BJ Fogg from Stanford, the habit formation, the tiny habits, and and even some of the habits that the data feedback, these loops that it puts you in. Habits are incredibly powerful, and if the device enables you to create and become habituated to healthful behaviors, there probably is a value to that. And again, it's an if, right? Um, and then the other thing which comes out of the behavioral economics world is, and Dan Ariely, who was at Duke for many years and a behavioral scientist, one of the giants here, well published, he talked about the fact, and others do as well, that it's really your environment. It's really this sort of network effect. And so if you've got something on your wrist or your finger, your mind automatically changes. You're like, I'm the type of person
Yeah.
who is the type of person who eats well, who does
Yeah.
physical activity. I'm going to say no to that dessert. Look, I'm wearing this thing. It's a symbol. And so there's that part to it as well. And then finally, the whole notion of sort of the network effect, which comes out of a lot of different work, research, the Christakis from Harvard for years. The fact that your behavior is more tied to the behavior of your close friends and colleagues than probably anything else. So if you hang out with people who are wearing, whoops and auras and these other things, you become like them, right? You start to do the things they do. You're talking about exercise. You start to do exercise. Hey, I went to the gym last night. Did you go to the gym? I find that you become part of a community and your behavior is far more influenced. In fact, it is so strong. By the way, the opposite is true too. If you hang around people who drink or smoke or do drugs, your chance of doing those is far greater. In fact, it's not just your first degree and not even your second degree, but you're even influenced by your third degree context in terms of what you do, whether you do healthful things or unhealthful. So I think the combination of the network effect, your connection, that notion of the environment and that who am I and what type of person I am, and the habituation. So I think that there are some psychological direct and indirect benefits to these that may be more powerful than the data feedback.
Yeah, I can totally see that. And I wonder if there's a more button that can be pressed there to be even more effective.
Mm,
If you think about it, one of my challenges, so I'm a runner, and one of our challenges in our running group is that we all have different kinds of watches. So when
mm,
we go on a run, our distances are different. And they're usually within a tenth of a mile or so, and the paces are a little different. And that can be really frustrating to runners who like precision and want to know exactly when 5 miles is hit and those sorts of things. But if
right,
you think about it,
right.
if we all
Uh,
had the same watch and those watches actually talked to each other, right? It's kind of like the way you kind of stalk someone on Strava. You could give like a high five, or you could say like great run today, or you could build that community within the wearable itself. I think there are apps that have done a really great job of that. Strava's one of them.
mm,
I haven't seen a wearable take that step
mm,
of can we, again, from their perspective, it would be super smart marketing because they'd be pressuring your community to all buy their one device. But if they
Right.
did it well, they could leverage a lot of the things you just talked about to actually help not
Yes.
just create that behavior change within that community, but maybe sustain it, which I think is the
Yeah.
bigger piece there, right? And I do
Yeah.
agree with you that there is
Yeah.
something about what you're
Yeah.
saying to yourself when you buy a wearable, either about your intentions, your commitment, or the type of
Yeah.
person you either are or want to be.
Right.
And I wonder if there is a way for them to use some behavioral psychology within the wearable to press the more button on that piece. Because when we
Yeah.
look at least what the
Yeah.
wearable says it does, I
Yeah.
think that's where I get hung up. I don't know it actually does what it says it
I,
does, even
well,
if it does something really great in a different direction.
I would love to. That's so funny because I do think the notion of cognitive dissonance is that symbolism that I'm the type of person that wears these devices, then I'm the type of person that eats well and takes care of myself and does recovery and sleeps and all that sort of stuff. I'll stay away from the alcohol or less of it, desserts. There because having a wearable device and doing something unhealthy, there is a cognitive dissonance, right?
Yeah.
It's like I'm wearing this thing and yet I'm eating that, dessert or, and or I'm eating that fast food, and so I do think there's something to that. It would be super interesting to do an experiment where you had a dummy wearable. So it did nothing, but
Nothing.
it was like, I am healthy. And or it gave you, just feedback, like, if you walked or something. I tell you, the most powerful thing I have ever experienced from a wearable was early on this is by far the most powerful thing. I had a Fitbit early on. It was a really low tech device. But when I did something like I walked or something like that, it would literally on this little black screen, it would say, "You rock, Zev." That's all it said. "You rock, Zev." And I'm telling you, I have never felt as good in my life as when I saw that little thing that said, "You rock, Zev." And I mean, I literally would talk about it. I would tell my friends, look, I mean, I don't get that from my wife. I don't get that from my kids. My friends don't say you rock, Zev. All I get is like, how insufficient and inadequate I am. And for a device to that positive reinforcement, I tell you, I'm not kidding you, it's probably been over a decade. And I still viscerally feel good when I remember it says you rock. And so I do wonder, I'm going to just come out and say it. I think the psychological benefits of these things far outweigh any of the technologic quantitative feedbacks that you get from it. I just don't. I mean, I'm willing to have that discussion. I would love to have people, write in LinkedIn and tell me I'm wrong and show me the data, or have experts come on and debate this with me. But I think we are basically, feeding the wellness industrial complex. I think we're supporting the wellness industrial complex. And you know what? I'm not even saying that's a bad thing. I'd rather be supporting the wellness industrial complex than a lot of other industrial complexes, right?
And I think
Yeah.
the thing that I would say from a takeaway about wearables is
Mm,
this may be the one place where users have agency. Because unlike kind of in the food
mm,
industrial complex, like if you stop, I haven't bought an Oreo in God knows how long, but like nobody cares. Nobody cares in the food complex that I'm not buying Oreos.
mm,
But from the perspective of the fact that the data that is actually generating their product and their product development comes from you directly, we
mm,
do collectively have some agency.
mm,
So if you are part of those communities who are wearing wearables, I would say to you, what kind of information would you want?
mm,
What subscription would be valuable to you? So I want this subscription, bump you giving me all like 80 metrics I don't know how to interpret. How about I pay 14.95 a month for a team of people that are reviewing my data that will give
mm.
me recommendations on what to do next month? That I would pay for. But if you
Well,
just want to
yeah,
like spit out the data to me and
right,
then say good luck, that's
right,
not useful to me. So I think
right,
I want wearable users to remember you have a
right,
valuable commodity that those
mm,
companies desperately need, and it's the
right.
data you're putting into it.
You know, I would feel remiss if we didn't touch upon this. A lot of the problem too with this whole, wellness industrial complex with all that we're talking about is it's too costly and it's inaccessible for the majority of the population.
Yeah.
Um, you know, I don't know what percent of the population can spend hundreds of dollars a year on these devices because it's not just the device, it's the subscription, right? Every month you pay or every year. And then the supplements I was just talking about. I mean, I have to say I'm embarrassed that I've spent hundreds of dollars on supplements. My wife has a different word she would use for describing how she feels about it and about me spending that money. Every time I've gone to Europe, um, the folks say they go shopping every day. They go to the little grocery store, they buy their vegetables every day, they're fresh. They buy their meat every day fresh. They buy their fish and they come back in these little bags and every day they make a fresh meal, fresh meals. And in fact, in France, there was an article out not too long ago, I think it was in the New York Times, about how the government is really supporting this sort of, fresh food, fresh produce type of thing. And I really envy that. I think, I think it's a lot easier to be healthy in those environments. Um, and I know some of the research I've seen is that it's not the exercise. They don't walk or exercise any more than we do. I think that myth has been busted. So it's not that they're walking more or they're doing more physical activity. I think it really comes down to, and I think most food nutrition scientists would agree with this, that it really is about the food. It's about what you eat, and not even how much. It's the type of nutrition you eat, and yeah.
Which is really interesting because that means the wearables are measuring the wrong thing because they're just measuring your calories and your fat. But it doesn't
Mhm.
care whether you get those calories and fat from a processed protein bar or from a fresh egg or from cheese, right? That
Yeah.
was made in the local market. So, I think kind of to land the plane here and bring us home into, what we're going to be
Mhm.
doing and looking at in the coming season and moving forward. I mean, I think our plight here is to continue to kind of debunk these things, and to maybe draw a little bit more transparency of, what
Mhm.
is part of the wellness complex, industrial complex. What are you kind of buying into here? Not to say that, you can't do what you want as an individual, but more so to say, like, we want you to do it knowing what you're buying into. And
Mhm.
also to your point about equity, we want it to be very clear
Right.
of, health isn't that complicated. That's the message we
Mhm.
keep getting over and
Right.
over and over again. But the more our industrial complexes make it complicated, the more money they earn. So the more you have to buy, the more things you have to watch, and so it really, really is a matter of, let's just keep kind of digging into it and seeing, is there a thing? There may be a thing that ultimately really helps all of us improve our health and wellness, but so far we haven't found it.
It's yeah, it is really interesting. Technology, I mean, I think we're all big fans of technology. It's hard to argue against it. I think in my experience, technology is a great enabler, but it's
Mhm.
never the solution. And maybe we'll end the podcast with that profound statement. Um,
Love it.
and I really would invite folks, if you listen to this, if you agree with it, great. If you disagree with it, even better. Let's hear from you. I think this is an important conversation. To your point, Jess, I think what we're trying to do very, very explicitly, Jess and I have talked about this, is we're trying to be very, very real. We're not just trying to get another guest on that, so more people listen to the podcast. That's not the point. We're really trying to get under the covers, get very real, and talk about, is this, are these things helpful? Are they not helpful? How do we know? It's important to both of us for lots of reasons, including our own personal health and wellness, and quite honestly, the health and wellness of our families. So anyway, Thanks for if you listen to this, thank you for putting up with us. I feel like you've wasted another good 30 minutes, as Car Talk used to say. But thank you. Thanks for it. And again, I would love to hear from you.